Welcome back, listeners. I'm so thankful that you're here, and I'm really looking forward to today. I have the lovely Rhonda Nordick with me. And Rhonda, I think you are a certified divorce financial planner. I don't know. I didn't look at my notes. Did I say that right?
Certified divorce financial analyst. Yeah.
Analyst. Okay. And I think the thing that I love about you most is that you want to empower women,
Yeah.
which we all do. And I always want my listeners to feel less afraid. So today we're first going to start with Rhonda's story, what led her to do this work that she's doing. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to gain confidence in finances because I still need this. It's something I've really been working on. So you can probably help me through it too, but getting that financial confidence.
Yeah.
And then I thought, oh, let's talk about negotiations because I
Mm.
think so many times, I mean, a lot of my clients are mediation clients
Mhm.
and I'm helping them negotiate and holding their hand through it. But I like that you have something to teach people how to negotiate on their own. So we're going to go there too. So, Rhonda, thank you
Okay.
for being here. Welcome. And would you please just share with the listeners your story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, the best place to start is really something that I shared in my book called Bold Beginnings.
Yeah.
And, recently, and why this is top of mind is because I wrote this book over 2 years ago. And I shared for the first time publicly my relationship with money and my relationship with money growing up with my family. And I was a little nervous to share it with my mom. And so at the end of the day, I had an opportunity in her final days to say, Mom, remember that book I wrote 2 years ago? I said, I'd really like you to read part of it. And she's always been and always was a giant fan of my speaking and my writing. And so she read the book, or at least the section that I wanted her to read that shared a little bit about my story. Because here's the thing, right? When we're telling our truth, when we're telling the truth, ultimately what ends up happening is we start to question. Like, we don't want people to misperceive our intention. We don't want it to be, at least I know I don't want it to be disrespectful. Like, I really put a lot of effort into how do I share my story so that people understand where I'm coming from without throwing, my family under the bus.
Hmm.
And so my mom read that portion of my book. And afterwards, she said, five simple things. And she just said, Rhonda, you told the truth. And I think, for a lot of the women that I'm working with, they have a hard time to tell the truth to themselves, tell the truth to their soon to be ex or their even sometimes their attorneys or their mediators, right? I mean, they're afraid. And I wasn't necessarily afraid. I just really didn't feel like it was the right time. And then, it was the right time. And it was really, and in my mom's true fashion, she read it and said, Rhonda, you told the truth. And oh, by the way, I want you to write my obituary and I want you to make it spicy, is what she said.
Oh, did you do it?
Oh, I did. I did do it, and it was so fun, and, she was always my biggest fan. I started speaking, publicly when I was 11 years old,
Cool.
and I did a 5-minute speech for the Optimist Club into a room of adults, you know, in junior high or whatever, and I look around, and in that 5-minute period of time, I had the adults laughing and then the next moment wiping their tears, and I stood there and I thought, "Okay, I'm onto something here." Like, if I can use my voice to impact and move people, I think this could be really great. And so, as much as we want to think that it's, all about money and all of those pieces, right? I think at the end of the day, the confidence component, we've got to be able to take a look at our history with money. And for me, it was okay. I have a dad who is addicted to gambling. I have a mom who was, and my parents were still married, right? Um, a mom who really wanted to make sure that she could control the finances. So she was risk adverse. She wanted to save. She she just controlled everything, but it wasn't controlling in a sense of like when we think about people that we're working with, like, oh, no, she was controlling out of like desperate measures to preserve what they had worked for. Because historically, over the years, right? And so her decisions were based on um data. I mean, my dad would blow his entire paycheck at the casino. So it wasn't like, oh, I kind of sort of think he might. No, he had done that. And so she, as a result of that, ended up being, super conservative. And anyways, growing it up in that kind of environment where you see during the 80s and yeah, probably mainly the 80s, not so much the 90s, where my parents would, use their house as an ATM. My dad would rack up bad debt. He'd make bad decisions. He'd buy vehicles, be upside down on them. They'd roll them into our house. They'd refinance. And then, they'd end up doing it again and again and again until you get to the point where in the 90s and 2000s, I mean, you couldn't really do that as easily anymore. Nobody's really doing that. I mean, you might take out a home equity line, but they're not doing these refinances like I saw my parents do, and basically my dad was using, our house as an ATM. So, like, that context I think is important because for me, it's not necessarily just working with women that are going through divorce. The reason I chose to work with women that were going through divorce is because I felt like it was where I could have the greatest impact. I was really getting frustrated with women saying, "Well, we've got a guy, or my husband says it's going to be fine, or I haven't seen the statements, but this is what he's telling me, and I'm not really verifying the information." And then they get to a point where they realize that they wish they would have asked some of those questions, and now they've got shame and guilt around it. It just becomes this whole like rat's nest of like,
Well, and I can kind of share my little story too.
oh,
My husband was going through heart surgery and like retired kind of like a little bit woo surprise to me. And even though I took care of the finances, I really didn't have access to any of that information about his retirement. And that was scary. And Rhonda, because of my stories, and just like you, I don't want to like make my parents feel bad, right? But the circumstances of how money was thought of when I was growing up kind of led me to be someone who stuck my head in the sand. I was a little bit afraid of it. I thought it was maybe um, hard to get. You had to work hard for
yeah,
it. You make up these stories in your head. And just recently, kind of out of necessity and because, like, about self-coaching and stuff, I realized I need to learn about this, and I became unafraid, and I'm getting to be a woman who's kinda into this, and it feels so powerful, but let me ask you, I don't know, what was your story growing up with the how did you feel about money? Because it when you growing up the way you did.
yeah. I mean, so there's a couple things. One is I did not feel risk adverse. Like I didn't have a problem taking risk, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Mhm,
I really did enjoy saving, but spending money, especially big purchases, like, oh my gosh, right? It's a lot of anxiety, right?
mhm,
Um, and so I think, at the end of the day, when I went through some of the family history, like one of the things I'll encourage my clients to do is I'm like, okay, put together a family tree, but not for the purposes of lineage, but more so like, okay, what are the attitudes and beliefs around, money from your parents and your grandparents? And there were a lot of things that kind of were funneled through that tree, right? Um, and I think at the end of the day, it was, hey, listen, there's a couple pieces to financial confidence. One is the knowledge. So, how do I acquire the knowledge? But the other part of it is, how do I create experiences that allow me to be able to put that stuff into practice? Because if we have the knowledge without the experience, hey, it's theory and that's all great.
mhm.
If we have the experience without the knowledge, we're like, hey, I'm just trying stuff. I hope something works. Like, that's not a good idea. And you get those two things working together. I've seen this happen over and over and over again. And that is where women's confidence accelerates exponentially in a shorter period of time because they now have the formula for that. And so I think, as particularly in the divorce space, what has been interesting is that now I feel like there's so much knowledge, or at least, information available,
Mhm.
that now people need knowledge, but they need wisdom as well. Because it's not just like, hey, I'm just going to chat GPT my way through this, or I'm going to get all this information. And then, okay, well, what information do you actually need to be able to make this decision? And one of the things that we're going to be working on is, I spend a lot of time helping my clients decipher like information that they're reading and how to apply it and what maybe they don't need and what's, noise and all of that. But and I don't want to say we're just trying to get through the divorce process, but women that are going through divorce in particular we only have so much bandwidth when we're under stress and there's
Right.
trauma. We got to pick what we're working on. And if I can say, listen, here's the one or two things I need you to be working on, my chances of them doing it are better. And it helps increase their ability to be able to generate confidence because they're having little successes and
Right.
wins along the way. What I'm not able to do because I don't want to overwhelm them is go into a lot of detail around financial education. And I used to do a lot more of that when I was in the financial industry, but now I'm so specialized. I want to be able to provide high level trauma informed care for my clients. And I give them little nuggets of education, but not at the level that I could if they weren't going through divorce. So one of the things we're going to be doing is kind of building that in on the back end to say, listen, when you get through this process, we're going to then um, further set you up for success by now that you have maybe the bandwidth and you're through that process and you felt well supported and you've rebuilt your trust and your confidence is better. Now let's have a conversation about actually dialing in. Okay, what are the different types of insurance? How do you select an advisor? What are the different types of investments? Not options, but like categories,
Mhm.
right? And that's really what I think we're going to end up doing because women are asking for it.
Mhm.
But in the midst of the process, to go into that too in detail is just too much.
I so hear you, and because it's like that you're just trying to survive mode. And I know myself when I've gone through really hard times that I can, do all the self-coaching I think I can, and then something really big happens and I'm stuck. I'm just kind of sitting there trying to just move my body and survive. And so I love that you're talking about these little steps because you do need to take them when you're going through a divorce because the finances are a big part. If you have kids, they're probably a bigger part, but finances are important. Um, and so I just want to know when you're working with women who are going through this, what's that first little step? Like, say someone's listening and they're just found out they're going to get divorced and they have no idea anything about their finances. How can you help them not be afraid? And what's that first little step that they can take?
Yeah. I mean, apart from my podcast, which is of course, awesome. Like that's what
Yes.
it's all
And that'll be
for.
in the show notes.
But I mean, from a practical step, I think there's I always say like the simplest and easiest, and I say easiest in air quotes, okay? But like is to really just start to look at their spending. Because at the end of the day, there might be accounts or things that they don't have access to. And it's like, okay, what's the one thing that we could start to kind of dial in? Well, we could start to get an idea of what those expenses are,
Yes.
and then we look at current expenses and then we looked at projected expenses. And the tricky part about budgeting is I always say like it is never really sexy or glamorous and it feels like a little bit of a moving target always. But it's so important to all of the other pieces in the divorce process when it comes to negotiating around support and, looking at property division and, okay, well, what is it that you actually need? It really does a lot of times come back to the budget.
Mhm.
And it's giving people, women in particular, the tools and the confidence to be able to advocate financially without apology.
Mhm.
And so I would say the budgeting piece is just really, really important.
I totally agree. And that's always where I have people start. And it's kind of one of those things where you do have to have the courage to look at it. And once you do, then there's like this underlying piece. Even though, like, when I help my clients even together, there's a little bit of an underlying piece when we can take a look at, okay, here's my expenses. Here's what I think they're going to be. This is what's coming in, that it starts to open the doors, and it's courageous. It's not easy to do. It's kind of like going to get a workout, or you know what I mean? How there are things you kind of don't want to do, but once you do them, you feel so much better. Hold on to my hope and my belief that you will feel better after you start digging into this a little bit. So once they get their idea of their expenses and their budget, then do you have them look for where their assets are, or what's next?
Yeah. So the framework that I really use, Lisa, is my bridge method, right? Which is, hey, breathe and build your team. So who's on your team? What process are you using? Are you doing mediation? Are you doing litigation? What does that look like? But then we do a review the financials. So we're gathering and organizing the documents and working on the budgeting. Then we're identifying the gaps. Where are the gaps, right? Is there gaps in information, gaps in transparency, gaps in income? What are we trying to solve for that's going to help us get the clearest picture possible so that we then can dial in the data? We can look at property division. We can crunch those different scenarios, keep the house, not keep the house, liquidity, tax concerns, all of those pieces. And I just try to make it super clear. Like as that this is the teaching in higher education for almost 15 years. Like I can take concepts and be like, listen, it does not have to be that complicated. We still have to get it accurate. We still have to operate from a position of excellence. But we can give you three different scenarios and make it pretty clear if we've done the work leading up to that. And then we're looking at property division in more detail and support.
Yep.
So support analysis on need and ability to pay. Um, a lot of times with the income, I will always say the output in the calculators is only as good as the numbers we're putting in. So what are we using for the income and how did we get to that number? Um, so those are the kinds of pieces. And then once we get that dialed in, then we can start to have, conversations around negotiating. And I know that's one of the things we're going to kind of be talking
Mhm.
about.
Wow,
Um,
you did a great job teeing that up. That's what I was going to. So the thing is once they've kind of gone through this work, they're probably feeling a little more confident, right?
yeah, yeah,
And so now let's talk about that negotiation, the formula for success.
yeah. So I think a lot of times people feel like negotiation is maybe creates some angst for them, maybe some anxiety. Maybe they feel like, I don't want to make it worse. I don't want to upset the apple cart. I don't want to rock the boat, whatever we want to say. Right. And so they say, well, they end up agreeing to things that maybe they either don't know that they shouldn't be agreeing to or whatever. So, one of the things that I really have leaned into over the last decade is how do I become better at negotiating? And I did this in several like business deals with my own business and some things in my own life, but I want to be able to teach women how to do this because I think it is so valuable. So, the formula is an acronym. It's called a NOT, ANOT. So, what that means is acknowledge, naturally is the N, obviously is the O, and T is the ask. What are we asking for? And I think the key thing here is that we can use this for big things that we're negotiating. It could be little things that we're negotiating. It could be with your divorce team. It could be with your soon to be ex. It could be with your, whoever. Like this formula works so well. It even could be used if you were invited to be on a board, right? Like, hey, we've got this opportunity. We'd like you to volunteer on the board, blah, 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 whatever. Okay. So what you do is you say acknowledge. Hey, we always start with gratitude. Thank you so much for something genuine, right? And let's do this in the context of mediation because I think that that would be most helpful. So let's say that they're in the midst of negotiating and they're in mediation, and one party wants the other one to, buy them out of the house. Okay. So, hey, thank you so much for, bringing this to the conversation or whatever. It doesn't have to be like this big drawn out, like just something of gratitude. Right. And then we say, well, naturally, I. So if I was doing it, I would say, naturally, I want to make sure that, let's say I'm the one who's keeping the house. Naturally, I want to make sure that I am in a position where I can keep the home. And then what I would say is, obviously, you want to make sure that you're getting what you deserve out of the equity of the home. So what we're doing is essentially we're queuing up naturally I because we always think if somebody starts with themselves, we're like, and what's in it for you? Where? So we just start with that. Like, naturally, I want to make sure that I can keep the house. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're getting what, and they're going to say, heck yeah. So we're getting their buy in early on. And then we're saying, what is the ask? Okay. And the ask isn't always like dollars and cents. And so while it might be dollars and cents, it might be the ask is I would like to be able to have 6 months or 9 months or 12 months to be able to evaluate the best option for refinancing or a loan assumption. Is that something we could explore? So I'm not saying answer me right now, yes or no. I'm planting again that seed to say, can we have a conversation?
Mhm.
And most likely, hopefully, they would say, yeah, we can have a conversation. Great. Let me go back and get the information that I need, crunch some numbers, and figure that out. Right. So it's, I like it because it's really just foundational, good communication that's taking the pressure off of the person who is the one who's feeling like they're maybe leading the negotiation.
Yeah.
And also for the people that are on the flip side, they're feeling valued because it's like, you're engaging them in the conversation. Versus a lot of times what I see is women in particular will say, well, yeah, okay, fine. You can keep that. I'll keep this. We'll call it, or they just like the other person keeps pushing and pushing and they keep saying yes, yes, yes. And all of a sudden now they're backed into a corner and they don't know how to get out of it. Right. And so the more that we can tee up those conversations around negotiating in a framework that works. I mean, I've used that to coach clients on asking for raises. I
Mhm.
have used it for, I mean, all kinds of things. It's
Mhm.
so helpful. And
It
so,
is such a life lesson. I even notice, Rhonda, like if I'm sending an email to someone, if I can start with gratitude or kindness. I mean,
yeah,
this is kind of a
yeah,
kind
yeah,
formula.
yeah,
And I like that you're saying, okay, so this is what I want. Obviously, you want. And that way, if that's not what the other person wants, they also have the opportunity to clarify it. And then they know that you're really hearing them. Cause
yeah,
sometimes I have people say, can you repeat what you know what I mean? Just to make sure that they're catching what the other person really wants and really said. So I love that. And it just keeps it so simple. It's just like a little life. I mean, in life, anything you're looking for,
yeah,
thinking about conversations with my husband, that could be hard
yeah.
say something that you're grateful for. Gosh, what a great and it sounds like you kind of were the scientist that tested this out yourself and came up with
Oh,
it.
it has been a game changer. And to your point, like that way, then when you're sitting at, your computer and you need to fire off an email, it forces us to pause for just a minute
Mhm.
because if we're negotiating, there's probably some emotion involved.
Uh-huh.
I mean, like, if we're getting fired up about it.
Right,
We're like, okay, what can I be grateful for? And it doesn't, and we're not faking it. We're just queuing up that I can
right.
find something to be grateful for in this situation that might not be so good.
Well, and I think too, as I'm thinking through this, I think what you're talking about could help women. I know a lot of women too who have maybe just agreed to something because they just didn't want to deal with it anymore. or they wanted to be done with it. Or sometimes if they're feeling, like I'm a people pleaser, I could be easily swayed. But I think if you give them this powerful tool where they can come in nice and
Yeah.
be kind, I think it almost makes it more comfortable for
Yeah.
somebody who maybe would be a little less inclined to negotiate strongly. What do you think
Yeah.
about that? I just was thinking about that as you were talking.
I love that because, here's what's interesting, right? Is once we start to develop these tools, it feels more aligned. Like I I'm very confident in my communication. And also, to your point, I am also a people pleaser, like at my core default, right? And so, like, that's what we're battling when we do that. So, we don't want to show up aggressive. We don't want people to think that we don't have the right intentions, even though we can't control that. We want to show up in the best way that we can to engage in those conversations. And I think the other thing that I just want to mention is a lot of times when people, this is essentially in the category of assertive communication, right? And I remember taking a class in college, communications course, and they were talking about assertive communication and they were giving us and I was like, oh my gosh, like, I think I'm going to lose my cookies. Like, I cannot do this, right? Like, I told everybody what my history was. It was avoidance at all costs because it was just challenging. And so now I put myself in the spot where I'm like, okay, we got to figure this out because if I don't, I'm going to continue to be miserable and this just is not working. And so I had to find a way that I felt like I could show up in a kind way
Mhm,
and still have some power.
mhm.
And I've literally been using this for 10 years. I swear by it because it's been so helpful. I mean, everybody that has gone through these types of challenging things, the good news is we can learn how to communicate assertively.
Mhm.
When I was learning some of these skills in my early 20s, I went through a certification. And in this room were 22 women from across the country. And they did a little, informal survey. But the bottom line is everybody in there except one person both parents were assertive. And this particular person was assertive. The rest of us were either passive or aggressive. But the whole point of this certification program was to say, listen, if I can give you the tools, again, the knowledge and the experience working together, now we can actually help you step into communicating assertively. And it was one of the most powerful things I've ever done. And so I'm so grateful that I have the opportunity to share with women and help women do this during a time that is so challenging because it is something that they're going to be able to take with them well after the divorce is over.
So, Rhonda, I just love that we're kinda ending with this because it's more than a tool for divorce, right? And it feels so true to who I am. So, it feels like if you are a people pleaser, it gives you a way to be assertive kindly. If you're an assertive, aggressive communicator, it gives you a little bit of, okay, here's a little teaching moment on don't forget to start with that gratitude. So it works for all
Yeah.
types, I
Yeah.
feel. And so I feel like that is so helpful. Rhonda, I love this because I learned something new in all of these. And I know it's gonna help my listeners. And I just want you to know I feel so blessed to have you here today. I'm so thankful. I had you on a long time ago when I first started this. So thankful to have you back. And I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing. And thanks for being here.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you today.
Yeah. You take good care.
Thank you.